Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this event between Merchant Fraud Journal and People. We're going to give everyone just a minute or two to show up, but we're looking forward to a great event and we will get started in just a couple minutes. All right, welcome everyone to this event between Merchant Fraud Journal and People. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have you here today. I'm Bradley Chalupski, the editor-in-chief of Merchant Fraud Journal, and we are here today with two absolutely amazing guests. First off, we have Paul Fisher, the Vice President of Sales at People, and Alex Hall, a reformed fraudster and founder at Dispute Defense Consulting. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a minute, but just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be discussing here. Over the last few years, there's been a huge shift towards understanding fraud prevention, not just in the context of chargebacks, but as in an overall customer experience issue. And that really begins with establishing trust at every touch point and maintaining trust at every touch point. And this shift has really, really been important for merchants looking to stay on the cutting edge. And so we wanted to bring content to you, discussions to you that gets at this idea and really brings out how you can do this in your own business. And we couldn't think of anyone better than Paul and Alex, who has extensive experience with working with merchants, with his experiences as an ex-fraudster, to get at that customer experience. So guys, please jump in, introduce yourselves. We're looking to a great event. I'll be here throughout the event and then jumping in with some questions and some explanations as needed, but take it away, guys.
Thanks, Brad. Good morning, everybody. Alex and I are excited to be spending time with you today. We're going to be discussing how automating trust can help you stop fraud. We're honored that the Merchant Fraud Journal is allowing us to share our experience with you on this webinar. I'm Paul Fisher, and I lead the identity verification sales here at People, the world's leading provider of online identity information. Businesses depend on People's verification solutions to quickly verify if a transaction should be approved, while increasing efficiencies and reducing fraud and customer friction. I'm a 25-year veteran in the industry, focusing the last 10 years, particularly on identity verification and identity theft protection in the e-commerce, retail, and financial markets. Alex, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Paul. So my name is Alexander Hall. I'm here with 14 years of experience relevant to fraud and fraud prevention. In 2020, I founded Dispute Defense Consulting, and now I work with merchants to develop effective fraud prevention strategies and service providers to challenge, refine, and expand their offerings. In addition to this, I currently sit on the board of advisors for the UNLV Customer Experience Program. Thank you guys so much for carving time out of your day to be here. We look forward to a good event.
Awesome. Let's get started. Your customer is at risk when presented with a poor customer experience. There are far more trustworthy people out there than there are fraudsters. Yet to minimize this risk to your organization's current processes often mandate that you take measures that may negatively impact your customer's experience in transacting with you. When we submit good transactions into the manual review process, we introduce customer friction, and customer friction is a deterrent to the overall customer experience. Being able to confidently approve transactions hinges on your ability to know that your customers are trustworthy. Alexander, how are fraudsters focusing on the customer experience?
Well, that's a very good point. One point, the mission statement pretty much for my advisory position with UNLV is to talk about the duality between the customer experience and the fraudster experience. Every touch point that a customer experiences is also a position where fraudsters seek to exploit. And that being said, seasoned fraudsters target every one of these touch points, and you'll see these represented in different methods across the board. Paul.
Thanks, Alex. As we spend time together on this webinar, you're going to hear and see the words trust and connections a lot. We're going to focus on what's being connected and why that's important to prevent fraud. Identity information is an integral part or component of every digital transaction. That's why it's essential to be able to establish trust in identity data. Current systems force you to manually validate names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, and all the other connections between many disparate data elements. And when those data elements don't connect, it can be quite frustrating. False declines cost you money, and there are multiple challenges in the current processes of manual review. Alex, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I'd really like to reinforce what you said about identity information being the integral part of every transaction. So identity information is the key component of every engagement that we deal with, good or bad. And an engagement might start with account creation. It might be a transaction. It might be a request for a line of credit. And there's many other examples. Identity information is crucial when seeking to make accurate determinations. And that's going to result in a balance between merchant security and customer satisfaction. So since fraudsters are not limited in their methods, nor the data that they leverage, service providers across the globe collaborate and sync up to provide merchants with the information that they need. So as you see on the slide here, the data sets can take many forms, starting with in-house proprietary data and stretching out to include data sourced by the service providers themselves.
That's good feedback. Verifying transaction-based identity elements and looking for the trust in the connections between these elements with independent, diverse data can elevate the level of authority and the reliability of each result. 2020 brought fraud to new heights. The coronavirus pandemic forced our customers to engage and interact in a customer not present environment. Chargebacks are on the rise. Stolen or compromised identity data has elevated fraud tactics by bad actors. And there's been a tremendous shift to online shopping, and the multiple data breaches exposed billions more identities. Alexander, how have fraudsters changed their methods to given the current environment?
Yeah, so of course, this is something I can definitely speak to. When fraudsters look to target new merchants, merchants that they haven't exploited in the past, one thing that they look for is what goes into their checkout process. So a shift into the e-commerce is going to open up a lot of exposure to merchants, and due to the very dramatic onset of the events of 2020, a lot of merchants weren't ready for that. In addition to that, we had merchants who were already in the e-commerce realm introducing BOPIS, or buy online, pickup in store. This is another system that fraudsters look to exploit whenever they're evaluating a new merchant to exploit. In addition to that, we have the pursuit of identity information having a significant uptick. We've seen these reports of ransomware being employed against healthcare agencies and things like that. We've also seen security breaches. Now, the reason why those things are picking up so hard is due to the PPP loans and the unemployment fraud that's going on out there. It's kind of created a perfect storm for fraudsters to really test their skills, and yeah, it's had a big impact on the market overall.
Yeah, with the increase of chargebacks, the volume of manual reviews has also increased, and not only is the customer, but now the fraudsters are quite anonymous in their measures. So it really requires a very robust identity verification solution to overcome what we've seen as challenges in the last 18 months or so.
Absolutely.
So I'd suggest there's a need for better data. Simple transactions are very easy to approve. When you have a single person with known identity information, approvals are near instant. But most of your reviewers' time is spent trying to understand and verify identity information that isn't quite that simple. It could be that the order includes unknown phone numbers, different billing and shipping addresses, or multiple identities appearing in the transaction, such as the account name being different from the cardholder or the shipping recipient name. Manual review of transactions is hard, and we simply need better data. Your thoughts, Alex?
Oh yeah, 100%. More data equals more accurate determinations. The way that I illustrate this is I say, consider a merchant doing transaction analysis with sole reliance on in-house data, right? They're going to have access to the information that's submitted on that form by itself. It's going to be a new set of information they have access to, and it goes into their historical data. Now consider a merchant doing transaction analysis who taps into like an expansive data set. Now, I mentioned profile building before. What that is in a nutshell is when a piece of identity information is purchased by a fraudster, essentially, and new data is being associated to it. So a phone number, email address, shipping, billing, these different items. Now, as those things get associated with the profile, the fraudster then feels confident in their ability to go make new transactions. Well, the merchant with in-house data will only see what's being provided on the checkout form, whereas the merchant that subscribes to these expansive data sets will be able to see how this interaction or how this data has existed across the merchant network, and they'll be able to make a more accurate determination. And this illustrates the importance of expansive data sets rather than sole reliance on in-house data.
Yeah, and the statistics you see there are quite eye-opening, right? iGroup estimates that the e-commerce industry will experience false positive losses of 443 billion in 2021. That's a much larger number than the projected fraud losses alone of only 6.4 billion. But the truth is, the overwhelming majority of falsely declined orders, greater than 70%, are actually legitimate. They're placed by trustworthy people. So imagine if you could quickly see a trusted transaction visually. So let's talk about better identity data. What is better identity data? Detecting trust requires more than validating multiple individual data points. It requires a thorough understanding of the connections between them. In your queue are hundreds of orders that need immediate review, and each transaction takes an average of 5 to 6 minutes for manual review. First, each piece of the data has to be verified to ensure that it's not a suspicious email, phone number, or address. Next, the reviewers need to see how the data is connected. What if the phone number is connected to one person and the email is connected to another? What irregularities exist in the account, billing, and shipping information? Analysts try to put those pieces of the puzzle together themselves and make sense of them. And even if software tools can tell you if each data element is identified or verified, they can't put the overall picture together for you. That's a lot of time-consuming, brain-bending work to find a good order. What are your thoughts on connections, Alex?
I think that's a magical term. The word connections is beautiful. As you said, when seeking good transactions, it's vastly important to focus on the connections between the data points. Now, we're moving into the holiday season. A lot of gifts are going to be shipped. Orders will have different billing and shipping addresses. Velocities are going to go up. Expedited shipping will increase. All of these items are flags to different companies and to different analysts. The question that I pose to merchants is, wouldn't you like your team to know that, someone named Bill in New York is sending this particular order to their sister-in-law in California? These answers will only present themselves when looking through expansive historical data.
So we need to not only know if the identity data elements are valid, we need to know how they are connected. Frankly put, truth starts with a connection, and connections matter. Why? Because fraud's rarely done by people that know each other. And when we are connected to someone, there are traces of that connection in the data that we leave behind. When people are connected, you can also be certain that it's not fraud. Connections matter because now you can use those connections to quickly discern a trusted transaction from a fraudulent one. A robust fraud platform can bring density, history, and consistency into the data elements. Couple of measurements here. There's over 3 billion smartphone users globally, 3.8 billion email accounts, and 3.9 billion people on social media. And it's all growing exponentially with growth every day. That's because identities are more than just a simple email, a name, a phone number, or an address. People's online entities evolve naturally over time. And as time goes by, more elements are created by the customer. The timing of the activity correlates with how real lives happen. The lifespan of a trusted identity is asymmetric. It's a natural looking process. And even though fraudsters can create connections between identifiers, they are symmetric and sparse with little to no source-to-source corroboration nor consistency. Most applications today lack this historical data, like past employers, past addresses, known affiliations, and the like. Furthermore, many providers lack tenure information, such as dates of employment or the age of phone or an email address, and most cannot provide the profile density that you see depicted in the slide. All of this information is critical to automating trust. Why? There's no way for a bad actor to go back in time to create multiple identifiers to use for their fraudulent schemes. There's no way for them to alter or fool the match confidence scores of these connections. There's no way for them to spread fake records across all the different data sources, much less link them together. And there's no way to age an email address, a mobile phone number, a delivery location, or a social media identifier to mimic tenure. A fraudster has a very difficult time trying to reproduce the natural consistency of how records connect and evolve over time. Alex, how can density, history, and consistency be used to defeat bad actors?
Well, you hit the nail on the head regarding how no matter how good a fraudster is, they can't change the data of the past that has already been recorded. That's the most important thing. And that's why, in my opinion, and based on my experience operating as a fraudster, identity information is crucial when understanding what you're dealing with as a merchant when trying to navigate the balance between merchant security and customer satisfaction. When a fraudster goes and builds a profile out, as they start to take action on one of these profiles, it's going to have what I call non-unilateral changes. So you'll see a new number be associated while the old number is still in play. You'll see a new email address be associated while the old email address is still in play. These additions, without being concrete changes, it should raise a red flag. And again, you won't have access to that information if you have sole reliance on in-house historical data.
Yeah, definitely. First seen, last seen kind of measurements or metrics in the individual data elements bring great visibility to the individual or the identity at hand. You also got to look for trust and spend a minute talking about trust. We need to stop looking at as an industry, looking for fraud in flag transactions, right? The overwhelming statistics that Ike presented regarding the number of reviews going into the queue and the number of good transactions there within, I'd suggest that we need to start looking for trusted connections instead. Why are trusted connections so important? Again, fraud rarely occurs between two people that know each other. As we've shown you, people that know each other, they leave digital footprints or digital traces of those connections. And people involved in a transaction might share or have shared a phone, a vehicle, an associate, an employer, or even a school. What can you add here, Alexander?
Well, I can definitely piggyback off of the fact that fraudsters' networks, their personal networks, are typically just not full of viable information to them for their purpose, right? That plus the fact that the risk grows exponentially as they would attempt to exploit someone close to them. It just isn't feasible to correlate connections to fraud. And that's why connections is a great indicator for reliable transactions and reliable engagements. That's what I'd like to add.
Yeah, well said. I mean, looking at the connections between data points is so important. Traditional reverse search tools allow you to see information on individual data elements, but we need to be looking at the full picture of the transaction, allowing the manual reviewer to make fast and confident decisions regarding the trustworthiness of the transaction and the individual identities themselves. A trusted platform can find corroboration for a data point across multiple sources. Here's a couple of questions to ask when looking for trust. In how many sources can the email or phone number be found? Can I find a corresponding age of the identity element in the source records? What are the connections between the identities and the individual data elements that can help with my decision? Now, here's a couple of fraud vectors that fraudsters or bad actors are using every day. Maybe Alexander, you can discuss how these fraudsters are using these different vectors.
Absolutely. So on the screen, we have these 4 different services that are being regularly employed by fraudsters. Disposable emails are rotated and monitored in order to communicate with maybe customer service or maybe to create accounts. VoIP phone numbers are being used to communicate with customer service or maybe place telephone orders. PO boxes are used for the final delivery of an e-commerce product, and freight forwarders are there in order to interrupt the path of the product. Now, when these 4 items and services are employed together, it definitely lends to the anonymity of a fraudster. And the beautiful thing is, again, by tapping into, a wide data set, you'll start to see trends regarding different phone numbers that are registered in certain areas of the world. You'll see different PO boxes that have bad histories associated with them, or no connections, or diverse range of connections over a short period of time. These different types of items can raise flags to your data analysts and help you make accurate determinations, both in establishing trust as well as identifying fraud.
Good. So I think you're saying fraud teams need to be looking into the trust and risk signals of the individual data elements, right? As well as the connections between them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd suggest a robust fraud management platform will be able to identify and highlight these trustworthy connections, as well as the many risk indicators like those depicted on the slide. After all, wouldn't you immediately decline an order that contained a disposable email with a voice over IP phone number and a shipping address that contains a PO box? Every one of these is a significant attack vector, and thus we need to be looking at trust and risk in the signaling of the individual elements themselves. So let's look at visibility. Trusted data can deliver immediate visibility to the transaction and its risk. Looking at the data inputs for a typical e-commerce transaction, the account information in dark blue, the billing information in gold, the shipping information in green, and the card information in light blue, you can see here on the left that you see a very trusted transaction and what it looks like. The dark lines represent connection strength, and the connection strength is the statistical likelihood that the connection is valid. Many connections with strong connection lines indicate confidence that the transaction is valid and provide a quick and easy visual representation that the transaction can be immediately approved. On the right side, you'll see a lack of connections where you would expect to see them. This indicates an untrustworthy transaction. Here in this diagram, none of the account, billing, or shipping information has any connection to the credit card being used. Your analyst or your manual reviewers can quickly decline this transaction given the visual representation. What do you think, Alexander?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with this one. Over the course of this call, we've touched on the importance of data, generally speaking. We've touched about the importance of expanded data sets, and we've talked about the value of accurate determinations as it applies to both customer satisfaction and merchant security. Now, these items have had a focus on tremendous amounts of data, and what you see on the screen is an articulation of that data as it pertains to the order being reviewed and the connections between the data points. Like you said, it's a quick representation. You can verify an order at a glance instead of diving into pages and pages of data and stuff like that across the network. So yeah, this is just a great representation of data.
Yeah, instead of 5 to 6 minutes per manual review, now it can take just seconds, allowing the review teams to power through order backlogs while meeting internal quality and customer service goals. It's a very simplistic visual methodology by looking at the connections between the data elements. And you can see, again, on the left, a very tight mesh of connectivity and that missing connectivity on the diagram on the right. Furthermore, with effective API integrations and machine learning models, you can also reduce the volume of manual reviews being placed in your queue. So here's a few success metrics you can take with you. Hopefully, Alex and I have convinced you that you can stop fraud by automating trust. You can remove detractors that are negative to the customer experience. You can leverage the data you have and that of your service providers to find trustworthy connections in the individual data elements. And remember, with density, history, and consistency in the data elements, you can approve more good transactions faster. Corroboration of data points across multiple systems is an absolute must. And trust and risk indicators can help you more quickly solve unnecessary investigations. With trusted identity, you can gain confidence in your decisioning by not only reducing the manual review volumes, but also reducing your time on case when a review is necessary. Okay, Brad, I think we have plenty of time for questions.
Yeah, guys, thanks so much for this great presentation. It's really so important for the community to realize that the name of the game has changed. And I think you guys really gave a great explanation of how being prepared is going to really be the key here with that data that can't be changed moving forward. And so I wanted to ask you what some of the use cases for leveraging this identity information that you're talking about are outside of just the transactions themselves, how it has additional value to people.
Yeah, we looked for, thanks, Brad. We kind of teed up a case for a very complex e-commerce transaction, right? Where, multiple individuals engaged in the transaction with a lot of disparate data. But as far as use cases elsewhere, right? I'd suggest that, this type of connectivity data, the connection data and the strength of those connections can be used for a whole slew of different, transactions. Onboarding transactions, for example, would be a great way to leverage this type of information. Person-to-person payments, for example, simple identity verification tasks along the way when signing up for a credit card, maybe in the e-commerce or retail space would be good use case examples. Any type of investigation where you're looking to, investigate, a questionable individual or transaction would be good use cases.
Awesome. And I think along those lines, we have someone here who jumped in with a question about building profiles. And I think that this is a really good topic to talk about as well, because we hear a lot now about how fraudsters are able to get at all these different access points throughout the customer journey. But at the same time, having data is not enough. You have to be able to put it all together. And so the question is, how do fraudsters build these profiles so that they can more effectively attack merchants? And then on the other end, what can merchants do in order to counteract that?
So I'll take that one. So building profiles is especially effective whenever a fraudster is going to apply for a line of credit, or if they're looking to maybe take over a house. I mean, fraudsters steal houses, fraudsters steal cars. There's a lot of different use cases for building profiles. When it comes to the process, as I mentioned before, associating new information is very important, but it's also about affecting the information that shows up on a credit report. When that comes into play, right, the way that's going to be represented to a merchant who taps into one of these expansive data sets, it's going to show, like I was mentioning before about the non-unilateral changes. You're going to see additional data over a short period of time be associated with this identity. So you might see an account name, billing address, shipping address, and then you might see that over a short period of time, a new phone number was associated, a new email address was associated. And that right there should indicate to an analyst that this identity has been compromised, or at least should raise a flag. You might want to, really take a better look at this. And that's the most effective use case. And the reason why I am such an advocate for the leveraging of identity information over simply payment information, right, overall, is because payment information is typically verified in a binary way. It's either accurate or not, right? Identity information has a lot more of a story to tell under the data. So by leveraging these connections, by leveraging the first seen, last seen that Paul mentioned, you can get a much better understanding of what's going on as it relates to the different data points here that are available. And to tell you the truth, if I were still operating as a fraudster, the leveraging of identity information is something that could stop me in my tracks. That's why I'm an advocate for identity information.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah,
that goes back. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just adding, we talked about timing and tenure and consistency in the data. The fraudster who's building profiles, those profiles are going to be static, and they're going to be disconnected from the real identity from the perspective of an address or an email or a phone number. That's not going to have the timing or the tenure, first seen, last seen kind of data that Alex was talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just as kind of a closing thought here is, again, going full circle back to the idea that in the past, looking at chargebacks was really much more about payment information. And people were really focused on, well, if I have these mismatches and this will indicate that there's probably a problem here. And I think it's really important for people to understand, not just that the conversation has moved past chargebacks, but really the entire way that merchants should be conceptualizing fraud has changed. And we're much more sophisticated now at our ability to detect these things through means that, like you guys just said, can't really be manipulated. They can't be as easily manipulated as in the past. And I think that if you take anything away from this webinar, working with experts like people like Alex who understand this and have a history of diving into these new ways of approaching these problems is really important moving forward.
Yeah, definitely, Brad. And, I would just add that, the fundamental challenge we have is in that we're sitting way downstream investigating the chargebacks, right? I think that the market's quickly shifting to bring the identity verification piece upstream at the time of the transaction, right? With API integrations, machine learning models, we can bring identity verification very simplistically at the beginning of the transaction as it's occurring, rather than wait until, fraud has occurred and we're investigating a transaction or a chargeback.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that you're really being much more proactive now than you would have been 5 years ago. It's not just, oh, I see these mismatches now that somebody's already put in payment information and is already requesting a purchase. It's now that you are collecting this information before that transaction is even initiated. And that gives you so much more information to use, but also gives you additional opportunities to catch fraudsters and to build profiles before you get to what the fraudster really wants you to see, which is the story that they're going to present at checkout. And I think that's a critical point.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, I really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing this with our audience. This has been a wonderful, wonderful presentation with a lot of really good information for people to think about. And I'll let you guys sign off by telling everyone where they can find you on the web and how they can get in touch with you.
Certainly, www.people.com.
And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. Alexander Hall. Again, my company, Dispute Defense with an S, Consulting. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll be sending out a recording later on today or tomorrow, and you can get all the latest news and information about how to fight fraud at Merchant Fraud Journal, merchantfraudjournal.com. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. Take care.